What are the team members experiencing? What do they need? What would help them do their jobs better? And how did the customer play into that? And what sort of feedback loop do they need?
Hey, you're not going to believe this, but they're using masking tape, and it was just like, so we would be breaking down these experiences and really trying to make our experience, the greatest experience.
At our Best Buy, you literally drove in and there was a person with an iPad, and they were like a traffic control person who then told you where to do it. They were dispatching the product coming out, and I was shocked at what a smooth experience it was.
This was definitely a big shift in trying to build the type of relationship with customers that is beyond just transactional, and the need to really have a much more sophisticated view of customer lifetime value and downstream impact of various different customer activities.
And I think a lot of it comes from the difference of having your people believe in the cause versus believe in the fact that they're deploying code or making some change, right? Believing in the outcome rather than the task.
And I think a lot of it just has to do with trust. And if you don't have trust in your organization, you're going to have a really hard time doing these big, massive, multi-divisional business problems.
We've got an incredible behind-the-scenes story coming up that shows what happens when a retail giant has to completely transform overnight.
And this one's a frictionless experience first, because we're talking to two former Best Buy leaders, Robert Neer and Brent Van Wieringen, who were right in the thick of one of the most impressive retail pivots I've ever heard of.
And here's what's wild. They already had curbside pickup running in about a quarter of their stores before COVID hit. It was just a nice-to-have feature that they were slowly rolling out. Then suddenly it became literally the only way customers could get their products, and they had to make it work everywhere immediately.
Plus some insights about what they learned from studying other retailers' curbside attempts during that time, and spoiler alert, a lot of them, not so great.
But what really makes this episode special is how they connect these pandemic lessons to bigger questions about product management, team dynamics, and creating urgency without chaos.
Robert makes this point that really stuck with me. Instead of thinking about AI as replacing team members, what if we thought about it as adding a fifth team member to help everyone move faster together?
These guys also worked on Best Buy's experimental 5,000 square foot stores. Imagine taking a 32,000 square foot Best Buy and shrinking it down to the size of a T-Mobile store while keeping the same customer experience. That's some frictionless thinking right there.
So get ready for the masterclass in crisis innovation, team collaboration, and what it really takes to transform a customer experience when everything is on the line. Let's dive in.
Talk a little bit about your roles at Best Buy and what you were doing when the pandemic hit. We're going to start there, and then we'll talk about other things, but I want to talk about the pandemic because as a Best Buy customer during the pandemic, I think you guys executed really well, and I'm just curious to get the behind-the-scenes story.
I was leading a team in a number of different cities of product managers and engineers focused mostly on our consumer-facing digital experiences, so the mobile app, a large portion of the website. Also, our tech stack for our retail media network was part of the team. So I was focused on leading product teams and engineering teams who were delivering the digital experience for our customers.
And I was, at that time, I was working within the customer office at Best Buy, leading a experience team that was centered on the shopping experience and the mobile native apps.
As I recall, you guys were already working on some sort of curbside pickup before the pandemic hit. Am I recalling correct?
Yeah, that's right. So it was a large team, and I think Brett and I were definitely involved and integrated, and our teams were driving some of that experience. And so we had done a pretty robust sort of buy online, pick up in store experience, and had started to move towards a curbside pickup to sort of create more flexibility, more convenience for customers, and allow them to just get what they had ordered very quickly and conveniently. And I think it was in about a quarter of the chain. So it had been stress tested, worked out, prototyped, developed, and was in the process of kind of operationalizing chain wide, and still learning, right? Still learning from every experience, and There was not really, I would say, a uniform approach in every location. It was still getting started and not scaled yet.
And it didn't necessarily have a real problem that it needed to solve. It wasn't until the pandemic that it became a must-have. It was sort of a nice to have at that time.
When the pandemic hit, I think what we had in place was probably an MVP-ish experience, right? Something that was adequate, but left a ton of gaps in terms of readiness and wait times and how prepared the store was for a given customer to show up. It just had a lot of, I think we put in sort of functional MVP and then suddenly needed to, not only scale it, but also optimize the experience for a scale and a volume that even at chain-wide, I think we didn't ever anticipate having the kind of volume because it became pretty much the only way to get your fulfillment at that point once the pandemic hit because no one was coming inside.
How quickly were you all able to roll that out chain-wide and actually make it possible to pick up at any Best Buy?
My recollection, and Brent, keep me honest on this, was it was an all hands on deck, really cross-functional, enterprise-wide problem because it was kind of existential at the moment. The only way to really keep anything open was to shift to this in this direction. And I think we went from about a quarter of the chain to chain-wide in like 72 hours or a long weekend. I think it was super fast. It was, I think, a tribute to all of the groundwork that had been laid in the thinking and getting that MVP going, that it could scale, and then the ability of the individual stores to really tackle their unique physical challenges. Because I remember, like, there was no uniform signage, for example, of like, where should somebody park? And so stores had to figure out, like, okay, where are we going to ask people to wait? Because we don't have a set of parking spaces marked with nice paint jobs that say curbside pickup here. So they, scrapped together signs and just created that really strong sort of feedback loop between the technology teams, the digital teams, the store operations teams, trying to figure out what was working, what are different people trying. I remember seeing pictures of just people having like, handwritten signs that they just like took a Sharpie to and just put up. And just tried to make it work. And I think, probably there was a huge amount of customer forgiveness of some of that messiness too, because everyone was just realizing that this was an unprecedented situation. So it was really a unique challenge. And I think the whole organization just rallied. But I think it was pretty fast.
It was definitely like a problem that had to be solved right away. And it was amazing to see everybody rally around it. Like, I think some people did their absolute best work during that time. And it was a scary time. Like, people were affected by what was happening, but they were still like drilling down and trying to do the work and solve the problems. And it was really an amazing time, especially from the experience design side and research side, where people were just rallying together to solve these problems. And there was just so much humanity involved and such a nobleness to the effort that it happened really fast. And I saw some really amazing work happen in a very short amount of time. And it carried over. I think that we were learning as we go, as we should. And it came down to like what kind of masks should people be wearing, or, like putting tape on the floor to distance people. And like, how does that really affect people, from like, what's the state of people as they're coming into shop? They're freaked out. And so there was just like a lot of really, really human sort of problems to solve. And it was a pretty amazing time. It was scary. And I wouldn't want to repeat it, but I did see some of the best work come out of my team during that time.
One of the things I would say about Best Buy was it was one of the best orchestrated experiences because I had a lot of them. At our Best Buy, you literally drove in and there was a person with a iPad who asked me my name, looked up my order, told me what spot to go park in, because they had numbered the spots, because that's all you had. You had 30 or 40 cars all coming in, and they were like a traffic control person who then told you where to do it. They were dispatching the product coming out, and I was shocked at what a smooth experience it was. And I can't remember if this was 2 days or 30 days after, things started. So it may be that you guys worked that out over time, but talk a little bit about that physical and digital, and kind of what were the biggest obstacles that you had in creating this? Was it the mindset? Was it the people? Was it the technical?
I would say that one of the biggest challenges working across the omni-channel and an experience is some of these, companies, some of them are very big and they're very like gated between divisions. And so the physical, the human, and the digital, some of these teams, they only talked like at length during kind of intermittent times, and there's some sort of trust issues between divisions, and they have their own, outcomes and things that they're aiming at. And so I think that some of it's just like getting everybody to get in the boat and row in the same direction. And I think that the pandemic really gave us a reason. And I also think that post-pandemic, that those relationships across the omni-channel, like they flourished. Maybe it was because we were all, at home in our offices, and that was the only interactions that we had during the day. But I'd say that, people came a lot closer together, and it really helped to drive across, the experience. And another thing that I'd say, as far as like the quality of the experience, is that there were a lot of really talented people that were working on it in real time. And we would sit in a meeting and we'd talk about, Safeway's experience. We'd talk about like how terrible it was. We'd be out there and, just being like, hey, you're not going to believe this, but they're using masking tape, and it was just like, so we would be breaking down these experiences and really trying to make our experience, the greatest experience. And I think it just, it really kind of boils back down to like what we were talking about before. This was a noble cause. This was like, we're an essential that everybody needs, and we need to stay open, and, we need to be able to replace somebody's refrigerator, maybe not unplug their toilet, but, that there is definitely like that we need to remain in the market, but we also need to like provide, a sense of safety and trust to our customers. And that, that's something that comes across in regular everyday kind of life, but it means something very different when in context of, a pandemic.
It really did have a powerful sort of de-siloing effect on the organization, because I think, even just our organizational structure, we made what seemed like a logical separation from a kind of end user standpoint between the team that focused on the team member facing technology and the consumer facing technology. And they didn't really talk to each other enough, right? About like, how do those things actually map? And I think it elevated the reality of, omnichannel is a service design problem. It's a multi-touch connected journey that you have to think about all of those touch points. And I think that moment just sort of broke down any of those sort of topological barriers between teams and said like, okay, let's ask what are the team members experiencing? What do they need? What would help them do their jobs better? And how did the customer play into that? And what sort of feedback loop do they need? And how do they, simple things like, how does the customer tell the store that they're there and ready and be accurate and timely about that? And then where does that go? And it really like broke down some of those silos, which I wish I could say that de-siloing endured 5 years later. There's a lot of inertia and there's a lot of sort of returning to old patterns. But I think in pockets, I think there's good lessons to be learned in how that, sort of never waste a good crisis, because it really broke down.
So you guys touched on this, but what do you think are some of the enduring lessons that did stick, that companies are using today for creating these frictionless experiences that were born out of the pandemic?
I think people really sort of got a sense of what the purpose of the different kind of channels really is in the whole journey. And I think, this is certainly true at Best Buy, and I think at other places, that like, it makes you think about like, what is the real purpose of like a mobile app? And the fact that is with you physically, travels with you. It also has an immediacy in terms of informing you of status. How do you weave that into the omnichannel experience? and not just think about parity across every channel, but really think about what are the different touch points role in an end-to-end, what's going to be a multi-touch journey, a human, physical, digital journey. And that means not every channel is exactly the same and necessarily has to have parity. It is about what are they for. I think I see that coming up and manifesting in the ways that the mobile app is used in, I think, more progressive thinking omnichannel outfits.
I would add that I think that there was a lesson about intention around like meeting a customer where they are and really understanding like what does a customer actually need from an experience or a part of an experience or a product, or how we present a product to somebody. One of the things I think that every retail company struggles with is the discovery phase of the shopping journey. And so I think we learned a few lessons there, but that's always been sort of the difficulty is getting someone to discover a product, whether it's in a store or it's online or it's on your mobile app. So it's really important to meet them sort of where they are at in that customer journey. And I think that the pandemic definitely really humanized like our customers even more so than we had thought.
Yeah, one of my favorite concepts that's very similar to this. You have a customer that just wants to check on their order status, yet their session is counting against your conversion rate. So why are we letting that be considered an unsuccessful journey? So how do you go about figuring out what checking on your order status actually is a successful journey? It's just not one that leads them down the funnel. And that's okay, because we still want to give those awesome experiences to our customers. So how do we then augment our KPIs and our measurements to be able to allow us to count that as a successful journey? And so many brands just seem to get something as simple as that wrong, because they're still just going after conversion rate and average order value and saying that this is all we really need to do is just grow these two numbers. But it's way more of an arc than that. Like, you need to be thinking, how do I get loyalty? How do I build the second journey to come back and back and back? That's what matters the most. And it's a lot of what you're talking about here is meeting the customer where they are. That's why you saw both Chuck and I smile as soon as he said it. It's been a concept that comes up regularly on this podcast, but so many brands just don't do that, especially at a retail level.
This was definitely a big shift, and I think it has maybe some seeds during the pandemic of, trying to build the type of relationship with customers that is beyond just transactional. And that manifested in their push of a membership program, membership offerings, and the need to really have a much more sophisticated view of customer lifetime value and downstream impact of various different customer activities. And what we also found is, it's not rocket science that a predictor of people wanting to renew any sort of subscription or membership is the degree to which they engage with the value that's provided with that. And a lot of that engagement, to your point, if you just look at session-based metrics towards conversion rate, will look like your conversion rate is going down. So the more you get people engaged with like, oh yeah, what's included in my Geek Squad plan? Did I get the value out of my Total Tech membership? How do I get this other sort of service? I just want to check on it. I want to see what's in my inventory. I want to get service for a product that I didn't buy at Best Buy, but is now covered under my Total Tech support. All of that is going to look like it's not converting to a transaction. And so shifting away from purely transactional value to a lifetime value that has a view of what is the downstream impact of somebody doing something for the first time. And when I was at Amazon, they got very sophisticated about this, and they looked at like, what is the downstream impact of somebody trying a free Prime Video for the first time? And there's a number that goes behind that they could figure out, because it results in follow-on purchases of digital goods. It also results in a feeling like Prime membership is more than just shipping, and so I'm going to keep it. And so getting to that level of understanding of what is the downstream impact of all the various activities you want to encourage your customers to do with you helps you turn that into a clear business value, and not just a nice to have.
In the pandemic, obviously you had to move very quickly. And so back then you had to create urgency and bring teams together. But what you didn't want to do is create chaos. What do you think we've learned about that today of how you can create that sense of urgency and communicate a sense of urgency without it devolving into chaos with teams?
What the pandemic moment really brought forward was how urgency can be driven by a desire to move quickly to an outcome that is better for customers. And I think a lot of organizations try to create a sense of urgency by tying people to dates and saying, here's the deadline. Now, if you miss this deadline, you're going to be punished in some way. And there's nothing really necessarily inherent in the outcome and the value that comes with delivering on that date. And I think what I try to foster with my teams is speed matters, right? And moving quickly matters because the world moves fast and customers change their minds, and getting to a point where you're really showing the value to customers as quickly as possible translates into that lifetime value and that engagement. So there should be a sense of moving, that speed matters, but we're going to pay attention to the outcome. And we're not just going to arbitrarily push dates at people that creates that sort of chaos, that sort of artificial chaos, because I think then people take all kinds of shortcuts to meet, and that's where the chaos comes from, is people sort of have an artificial thing that they're trying to chase without understanding the impact of shortcuts that they might take and trade-offs, because there's always going to be trade-offs too. In any urgent situation, any complex area, you're going to have to trade things off against each other. And how you make those decisions is all about where you think you're going and what the outcome is you're trying to get to. And so I hope that is a lesson that, because I think that sparked in the pandemic. There was nothing said, you have 72 hours to do this. It was just, we don't know what's going to happen if we don't start fulfilling for customers in a way that is safe for them. And we have to move as fast as we can to get there. And so that was what resulted in the urgency, I think, without chaos, because we had clarity on what mattered and how we would make trade-offs to get there. And it wasn't just an arbitrary, you have 3 days to do this. Good luck.
Hey, Nick, remind me again, how much money can a retailer lose if their site is just 0.1 seconds slower during Black Friday?
Millions. And I'm not exaggerating. We've seen it in the data.
Which is why we've pulled together the 2025 Black Friday Cyber Monday Performance Playbook.
Yep, and that's real tactics from top retailers, includes core web vitals, performance budgets, checkout speed tips, and more.
If you're prepping for Black Friday, you need this. It's free, ungated, and honestly,
could save your holiday revenue.
Download it at bluetriangle.com/ebook. Or we'll put the link in the show notes. It sounds like mission becomes kind of important too in that, right? That there was this greater purpose, this mission that the organization gets centered on, and that drives the urgency that comes with it, as well as the execution pieces of it.
I think that's right. I think it's how you create sort of a sustainable set pace that people can, because they see this is not, we're not done when this is done, right? Like the job was not over when we went chain wide. The work was really just beginning, right? That was just the start. That wasn't the finish line. That was the starting line. And in order to keep that energy, to keep moving quickly, even though you've reached a milestone.
And I think a lot of it comes from the difference of having your people believe in the cause versus believe in the fact that they're deploying code or making some change, right? Believing in the outcome rather than the task. And you see that problem time over time where you're just simply wound up in the task. Okay. Oh, I need to complete this story. Great. That's awesome. But it's really about understanding why that story became prioritized and important and getting a sense of ownership. And if all you're doing is sending stories to your engineering team and saying, do this, do that, do this, do that, you're never going to create that environment. You have to create that environment by breaking down the silos, like you guys said at the head of this. You break down those silos and then all of a sudden they're part of the why. They're part of the mission. And that's going to give you that sense of ownership as an engineer or as a product manager, or as a support analyst, as a this or that, right? You're going to have that ownership because now you're a part of solving the problem. And I think that's part of where we saw a big difference at Home Depot specifically. It sounds like there's a lot of parallels into Best Buy based on this conversation too.
I would 100% agree. I think what you're describing is real agility in, and not kind of performative agile that still has sort of waterfallish handoffs. It pulls a multidisciplinary team all the way up to defining the opportunity and not just, getting assigned things to go do. So there's, you have to search for the opportunity together, bring your technology team as far left as you can in that process and ask them to solve problems, not just build stuff. And that's where you really get actual learning that you pivot and change down from, that is actual agility.
And this is a perfect plug for the Leslie Grandy episode where we talk about exactly this concept, which is anybody inside the organization can be creative. You need to allow and foster and harness that creativity of any individual, because they all have great ideas and they're going to have problems they can solve if you give them a chance to solve it.
Chuck, something really stood out. You called it a mission, which in my head, I'm thinking vision, like you have a strong vision and you make everyone feel a part of it, and then people become passionate about the problem, and then they just solve it, and you get speed and you get all of the good stuff. But when you say mission, it sounds like you don't have a choice. It's not a nice to have. And I really like how you frame that up. I wasn't thinking that way, but I think that's definitely how I would describe what was happening during the pandemic. It was a mission, and everyone, they wanted to play their part. So it was a measurable outcome.
So how do you create that today when you don't have a pandemic? How do you get people aligned to the mission of frictionless experiences and what that means from a physical, human, digital, etc.?
It's a challenge amongst a lot of organizations. And I think it's fundamentally, are people talking? Are they relating? I think there's a level of emotional intelligence for teams, individuals, and divisions. And if you don't have people talking and people are for some reason not willing to collaborate, or they're siloing, or they're gatekeeping, it doesn't work, and it slows down, and it's not nearly as good as it could have been. And so I think that it takes a little bit of coaching and a little bit of help to get teams there, but it's possible, and it's fun, and it's, like when it's working and people they create better things, they take risks together, they're clearly communicating with each other. And I think a lot of it just has to do with trust. And if you don't have trust in your organization, you're going to have a really hard time doing these big, massive, multi-divisional business problems.
I would double down on that communication and talking and exposing the members of the team not only to each other's perspectives, but also other parts of the organization, and really importantly, your customers. And I think you get a real sense of purpose when you expose your team to your customers in pain. When an engineer sees an end user having a hard time with something that they built, they're motivated to make that better and to address that challenge and to understand what's behind that. So exposing people to the opportunity to learn what's really going on, either direct from customers or, in a retail environment from the frontline teams, from the teams in the stores. When we started the Seattle office, we immediately reached out to all of the general managers of all of the 7 or 8 Best Buy stores around the region and built relationships and got to know them, invited them to the office, spent time with them, because we drew in the Seattle office on people who were not necessarily retailers over their whole of their career. They were coming from all kinds of different, maybe more software-centered areas. So we wanted them and ourselves to really understand what happens in a store. What do customers come to, and what makes that successful? What makes that hard? How does and just tapping into that really gave us a sense of mission, because then also we knew those individuals. We knew those general managers and the challenges that they had. And it created a ton of empathy and curiosity that really drove us in terms of like, let's make everyone's lives better.
What's your view on the purpose of product management and, why they shouldn't just be, I know you said it shouldn't just be backlog managers. What do you think are the myths behind product management that you wish more executives understood?
I've started to more and more think that the less we talk about product management and product led and start sort of, preaching the product operating model, the better. Because I think that vocabulary gets in the way. It's been out there for so long that either people have just actively ignored it or they're hostile to it. And it diffuses the principles behind what got people down that path, which is, number one, do you have a belief that your business results will come if you are better at solving customer problems than your competitors? Like, to me, that's sort of a core principle of a product team, not necessarily just a product manager, but a team that is thinking with a product mindset. That's how we will win, is we will be better at solving our customers' problems than our competitors. And then understands how you go about doing that. Like, you need to know them. You need to get to understand what their problems are. You need to seek opportunities through research and data. You need to have an experimental mindset around discovery and validation. And it takes all the way through to delivery. And I think those principles are true no matter what your organization looks like, whether you have a team you call product managers or not. And I think that's what should continue to evolve, is that we set up teams, no matter what we call them, that are oriented towards making those types of decisions and solving those types of problems. And I don't care if you never call one of them a product manager again. Like, it doesn't matter. And because I think that's a trap too. I think it's similar to Agile, right? You can say, well, we have a product model because we have a whole army of people we call product managers, but they're not thinking in any of those ways. They're not applying any of that approach to the problem space. And I would rather say, let's just teach your organization how to think differently and how to operate and solve problems from a customer first mindset. And if you want to call any of them product managers, that's fine, but you don't need to get the good results that you have. So I think that it didn't totally answer your question on what's changed, but that's sort of my hope of what can change, is that we start to understand what are the principles behind product led. What does that really mean in terms of how you solve problems and how you make decisions? And we get less worried about calling something a product operating model.
What do you guys think the role of AI is in all of this? Is it eliminating roles?
It's time to evolve and to take on AI and use it in some capacity to help you to solve your problems and to integrate it into your workflow. Because at a certain point, it was like some people were using AI. They weren't really supposed to use it at work. There was a lot of questions around intellectual property and, guarding customer data and everything else. And AI is being integrated into everything, and it's becoming integrated into real life. It's just like the internet. Like, if you don't use the internet, then that's weird. So I think that from the perspective of jobs, there's definitely like certain roles that are going to be eliminated that AI can do. And I'd say that, some of these agents and some of the things that are happening kind of at the forefront of AI and very fast are definitely going to take jobs. But I'd say that, like anything, it's a tool. You just have to learn how to use it and form a relationship with it. I've found that, I've been able to really 10x like what it is that I do with AI. I don't necessarily think that was like served up to me by a feature or anything within AI. It was, it's me. So I think that people have the opportunity to harness it and use it, and they should. And from a product perspective, I think it blurs the lines between product managers, designers, and engineers. But it doesn't necessarily replace the experience or the discernment that you need to use AI. So, if you remain curious and you want to learn and you're continually learning and you use AI, you should be fine.
I think it does provide some sort of fast movement through stages that used to take a long time or come with a bunch of risk. In the pre-AI days, the gospel around product validation, sort of the lean product playbook was you want to make sure that you're making the right decisions and making the right investment once you get to the expensive part. So how do you get there as cost effectively as possible through prototyping, through different things like that. I think those tools also evolved even before the generative AI moment to get to higher fidelity, more interactive prototypes more quickly. But now I think the leap that you can go to is getting to something that is truly functional and testable in the amount of time and with the cost that before was unimaginable. So why wouldn't you do that? Like, why would you still go through like creating a paper prototype and putting it in front of somebody if you could, in the same period of time, create a fully, functioning version of what's in your head and learn if you're on the right track? Because you still have to make the same decisions. You still have to say, okay, is this I'm going all in on this? Is this the direction I'm going? Am I going to scale this? I think you can just get there with higher fidelity input. And Brent said something on LinkedIn the other day, where the best design is where nobody has to guess. And so there's always been this translation layer between a design artifact and an implementation. And there's always sort of interpretation and guessing and feedback loops. But if I could put something together where nobody has to guess at what I was intending because it just does what I wanted it to do, why wouldn't I do that? And I think AI is on the path to making that real for a lot of people.
I think when I stopped being concerned about AI necessarily replacing jobs and started realizing it's going to also create some jobs, I don't know what the net's going to be, but I realized AI is only as good as you are able to prompt it.
I used to, do a lot of my own sort of self-learning through books or online courses. But right now, for me, the best and fastest way to learn anything is to get started trying to do it with AI, because it's a really good teacher. And it will, if you ask it to explain what it's guiding you to do and why, you can learn a tremendous amount in a short period of time from whether it's coding or whatever the topic might be. I haven't been a hands-on keyboards code writer for decades, but now I'm back doing that with AI and learning about all these frameworks because I'm curious in my interaction with it, right? I don't just let it spoon feed me. I say, well, why did you make this decision? What about this? Explain this term to me. I've never heard it before. And it's an incredible accelerator just to learning as well.
Yeah. Robert, what's one widely held belief about frictionless digital experiences that you think people get wrong, that you fundamentally disagree with?
The thing that comes top of mind is what we a little bit already talked about, which is that you can embrace, what's known as a product operating model by creating an organization of product managers and giving them things to go do. And I just think that people get that wrong a lot. It's similar to how people just implemented Agile by saying, well, okay, now we have, we have Scrum Masters and we have product owners and we're doing sprints. And so now we're doing Agile, but you actually have no agility and you're not really learning and you're not really shifting. Like the principles are not being applied. And I think that's true with product operating models too, is that there's a tried and true framework, there's a team topology that you can put in place, and then you can call yourself done. But the principles behind what really sparked the movement get lost. And I think people get that wrong all the time.
Great. And Brent, what's one widely held belief about frictionless digital experiences that you think people get wrong?
I think most roadmaps are just emotional thermometers for how well the team's actually working together. The silos and the feelings, the trust, the soft skills that aren't there. And you can see it. You can see in an experience where your organization is at. You're going to get a fragmented product, a fragmented experience, and people are going to see it. They're going to see your org chart. And I really think it's just about how your team trusts and interacts with each other and and how well they work together.
I love this whole train of thought. It probably opens up another 40 minutes of conversation, but man, is that such a profound statement.
Well, this has been a great episode. Lots of interesting insight that you guys learned coming through a challenging time and how it's changed product management today. How can people get in touch with you guys? What's the best way to find you?
Probably we are most active on LinkedIn, so find us on LinkedIn. Also, goodscompany.io is the website of our company, Goods, and there's contact information there for sure.
Well, thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Frictionless Experience. We appreciate being part of the journey into this messy, fascinating world of innovation behind the scenes. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review. Also, if you've not subscribed to our newsletter that comes out every other week, be sure to do that, because there will be an issue of that coming out in a week where we're going to take some of the topics that Robert and Brent have talked about and dive even deeper into those. So be sure and subscribe at thefrictionlessexperience.com. And you can always connect with Nick and me on LinkedIn. I am at Chuck Moxley, and Nick is
In Paladino.